Travis Rudolph was a name known to many, especially in the world of college football. His impressive performances on the field at Florida State University had earned him a reputation as a talented wide receiver, one who had a promising future ahead of him. With his combination of speed, agility, and sharp football instincts, he had become a rising star in the sports world. It wasn't just his athletic abilities that made him stand out. Travis had the charisma and confidence to match. His smile and infectious personality won over fans and teammates alike, making him a well-liked figure on campus. Everything seemed to be falling into place for him, and many believed that he would soon make a name for himself in the NFL. However, everything changed on one fateful night in 2021. Travis Rudolph found himself at the center of a scandal that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. On that evening, a call was made to the Tallahassee Police Department reporting a shooting at a house on the outskirts of the city. The police quickly arrived at the scene, where they found chaos. There were multiple people injured, and one man was lying on the ground, critically wounded. The man, 24-year-old Dominic, was rushed to the hospital in serious condition. But the most shocking part of the story wasn't just the shooting itself, it was that Travis Rudolph, the beloved football star, was the one accused of being the shooter. The news spread like wildfire. At first, the details surrounding the shooting were murky. Some reports claimed that Travis had been involved in a violent altercation with a group of men, while others suggested that the situation had escalated out of nowhere. What was clear, however, was that the public was stunned. How could someone like Travis, who had everything going for him, be involved in something so horrific? He had always been portrayed as a model athlete, admired for his discipline and work ethic. So how did this happen? As the investigation began, the media eagerly awaited more information. The story only became more complicated as time went on. Was Travis a victim of the situation? Or had he been involved in something much darker? Was this a case of self-defense gone wrong? Or was there more to the story? In the days following the shooting, rumors began to swirl, with many speculating about what had led up to the violent confrontation. The authorities were tight-lipped, but as details slowly emerged, it became clear that the incident was far more complex than anyone had initially thought. The shock of Travis' involvement in the shooting left many people struggling to reconcile the image of the popular athlete with the image of someone allegedly pulling the trigger. How could someone who had spent his entire career under public scrutiny and admiration suddenly be caught up in such an explosive situation? His once promising career now seemed in jeopardy, and his future, which had seemed so bright just days before, appeared to be uncertain. With each passing day, more information surfaced about what had happened that night. Some witnesses claimed that Travis had acted in self-defense, while others painted a different picture, one where the athlete had acted out of anger and frustration. As the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear that the situation was far from straightforward, and it was impossible to predict how it would ultimately unfold. What had begun as a night that seemed like just another quiet evening had quickly turned into a high-stakes drama, one that would haunt Travis for years to come. The shooting was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey through the legal system, one that would ultimately determine his fate. The night of the shooting began like many others in Tallahassee. Travis Rudolph, after finishing a long day of training and practice, was spending time with some friends at a house on the outskirts of the city. The atmosphere was relaxed, with laughter and music filling the air. It was meant to be an ordinary evening, a chance for Travis to unwind before the demands of another busy week. Little did he know, this would be the night that would change his life forever. The conflict started small, a misunderstanding between Travis and a group of men who had shown up at the house. Some accounts suggest the men were acquaintances, while others described them as strangers who had somehow gotten involved in the situation. What was clear was that tension was building. A minor disagreement soon escalated into a heated argument, and before anyone could defuse it, things had spiraled out of control. Words were exchanged, and emotions ran high. Travis, who had always been a calm and collected individual, was suddenly thrust into a confrontation he hadn't expected. As the argument grew louder, the situation became more volatile. Travis tried to remain composed, but the group of men surrounding him was becoming increasingly aggressive. Witnesses later described the scene as chaotic, with people shouting and pushing each other. At some point during the argument, one of the men, Dominic, the one who would later be critically injured, reportedly made threatening gestures toward Travis. As the confrontation intensified, Travis's sense of fear and danger escalated. He was being cornered by a group of men, some of whom appeared ready to escalate the violence further. The situation, once a verbal dispute, had transformed into something far more dangerous. According to Travis's account, it was at this point that he began to fear for his life. With the men closing in and the tension mounting, Travis made a split-second decision. In what he later claimed was an act of self-defense, he reached for his weapon, which he had on him for personal protection. The exact moments before the shooting remain unclear, with conflicting reports from witnesses. Some say they saw Travis brandish the gun after being threatened, while others suggest the situation was more ambiguous. What everyone agrees on, however, is that the argument had escalated to the point where physical harm seemed imminent. In a frantic moment, Travis fired the gun, hitting Dominic in the chaos. The sound of the gunshot shattered the night, and the atmosphere shifted from one of confrontation to one of panic. Dominic, critically injured, collapsed to the ground. The group of men scattered, and chaos ensued as people rushed to call for medical help. By the time the police arrived, the scene was a blur of confusion, with only fragments of the truth emerging. The incident left everyone in a state of shock. The question on everyone's mind was whether Travis had truly been acting in self-defense, or if the situation had been avoidable. As the police began their investigation, they struggled to piece together the events of that night. Witness statements conflicted, and the only clear fact was that Travis had fired the gun. Was this a tragic act of self-preservation, or was it something more? The mystery deepened as law enforcement tried to determine the truth behind the shooting, and Travis found himself at the center of a legal and public storm. As the investigation continued, the public began to form opinions about what had really happened. Supporters of Travis argued that he had acted in the heat of the moment, with no intention to harm anyone. On the other hand, critics questioned whether the situation had been handled appropriately. Was it truly a case of self-defense, or had Travis, in a moment of fear and confusion, made a fatal mistake? As the facts slowly emerged, it became clear that this would not be a simple case to solve. The truth behind the shooting seemed elusive, leaving everyone to wonder what had truly transpired in those critical moments. As the investigation into the shooting unfolded, the case quickly took on unexpected complexities. What had initially seemed like a straightforward act of self-defense soon began to unravel, revealing a tangled web of relationships, motivations, and hidden connections. Travis Rudolph's involvement in the incident, once perceived as a tragic but isolated event, now appeared to have deeper, more troubling implications. Authorities began digging into the backgrounds of everyone involved, including Travis. They learned that the men involved in the altercation had a history of criminal activity, something that had previously been kept from the public eye. Dominic, the man who had been shot, had a reputation for being involved in violent confrontations. Known for his ties to a local gang, Dominic had a history of intimidation and threats, often using violence to resolve disputes. His presence at the house that night, along with his friends, was not coincidental. Investigators began to piece together that the group had been known for their involvement in shady dealings, which raised new questions about the nature of the altercation. But the connections didn't end there. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Travis, while not directly tied to any criminal organization, had crossed paths with some of the same individuals. Though he had kept his life on a straight path as a college athlete, it was revealed that Travis had been involved in some questionable activities, ones that had remained hidden from his public image. There were rumors of past encounters with the wrong crowd, and some whispered that Travis had occasionally hung around people with unsavory reputations. These connections weren't necessarily criminal, but they raised concerns. Had Travis been unknowingly dragged into something much darker than he realized? The more investigators dug, the more they uncovered about the nature of the confrontation that night. While Travis had claimed self-defense, the evidence was not as clear-cut as he had hoped. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras revealed a portion of the altercation, but it was blurry and inconclusive. The footage showed Travis and the group of men in a heated exchange, but it didn't provide a clear enough picture of what had led up to the moment he fired the gun. What was also unclear was whether Dominic had drawn a weapon, as Travis had claimed. The lack of concrete evidence meant that the truth remained shrouded in uncertainty. Amidst the confusion, new witnesses came forward, each offering their own interpretation of what happened that night. Some claimed that Travis had acted in cold blood, going too far in his response to what was initially just an argument. Others, however, suggested that Dominic and his friends had been the aggressors, and that Travis, in a moment of fear, had fired in self-preservation. The conflicting testimonies made it nearly impossible for investigators to piece together a definitive timeline of events. Adding to the mystery, Travis's own behavior after the shooting raised questions. Though he had immediately called 911 to report the incident, there were inconsistencies in his statements to the police. At times he appeared calm and composed, but other times he seemed agitated, as though struggling with what had just transpired. His emotional state fluctuated, and his inability to fully explain his actions during the encounter left investigators searching for answers. The more the investigation unfolded, the more complicated the situation became. Was Travis truly a victim of circumstance, or had he been involved in something more sinister than anyone had realized? The lines between self-defense and aggression had blurred, and with each new piece of evidence, the case seemed to spiral further from resolution. As the authorities continued to sift through the evidence, the truth appeared to remain just out of reach, leaving the public to wonder whether the real story would ever come to light. The trial of Travis Rudolph was one of the most publicized and closely followed legal battles in recent history. The stakes were high, not just for Travis but for the broader narrative surrounding athletes' fame and accountability. With the shooting incident attracting widespread attention, the courtroom became a battleground where the truth, or at least versions of it, would be debated in front of the world. Travis's supporters and critics alike packed the courthouse, eager to see what the legal system would ultimately decide. The trial was expected to bring clarity, but as it unfolded, it became evident that the case was anything but straightforward. From the outset, the defense focused on portraying Travis as a man who had acted out of fear for his life. His lawyer argued that the confrontation had escalated so quickly that Travis had no choice but to defend himself. In their view, the group of men, including Dominic, had surrounded Travis in a threatening manner, leaving him no time to consider other options. They emphasized that Travis had always been a well-respected athlete, one who had never shown violent tendencies before. His past filled with hard work, discipline, and a commitment to his career was presented as evidence that he wasn't the type of person to use violence recklessly. The defense team also pointed to the lack of any physical evidence that could definitively prove Travis had been the aggressor. There were no witnesses who could directly testify to Travis initiating the violence, and the surveillance footage only showed fragmented moments of the confrontation. However, the prosecution's argument painted a much different picture. They portrayed Travis as someone who had crossed a line in the heat of the moment. The prosecution argued that Travis's decision to bring a gun to the confrontation was indicative of a premeditated response, not one born of immediate fear. According to their theory, Travis, frustrated by the escalating argument, had used the weapon as a tool to assert control over a situation that had spiraled out of his command. They pointed out the inconsistencies in Travis's statements to the police and suggested that his actions after the shooting, such as appearing oddly calm at times, undermined his claim of self-defense. The prosecution also called attention to the fact that Travis had been involved in relationships with individuals connected to criminal activity, implying that he might have been more familiar with violence than he had let on. The trial took a dramatic turn when new evidence emerged: surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store. While the video didn't capture the exact moment the shooting occurred, it showed key details that the original footage had missed. In it, Travis was seen walking away from the house just after the confrontation. The angle of the video made it difficult to determine exactly what had happened, but the timing seemed suspicious. Why had Travis walked away from the scene if he had been in legitimate fear for his life? The defense argued that Travis had been attempting to distance himself from the dangerous group, but the prosecution used this moment to further their argument that Travis's actions were not entirely defensible. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case would come down to a matter of perception. Was Travis the victim of a violent encounter, or had he overreacted in a situation that could have been de-escalated? With so much conflicting evidence, the jury was left to weigh the different accounts and decide which version of events seemed most plausible. The public watched with bated breath, knowing that whatever the outcome, the case would leave lasting impressions on everyone involved: Travis, his supporters, the families of the victims, and the broader public who had become invested in the drama. Despite the efforts of both sides to present their case, there was no clear resolution. The trial had only raised more questions about the true nature of the incident, and with each passing day it became more difficult to separate fact from speculation. The defense and prosecution had both made compelling arguments, but the question of whether Travis was truly acting in self-defense or if he had crossed a line remained unanswered. As the final days of the trial approached, the tension in the courtroom was palpable, with everyone awaiting the jury's decision on whether Travis Rudolph would be held accountable for the events of that fateful night. After days of intense testimony, closing arguments, and mounting public pressure, the trial of Travis Rudolph finally reached its dramatic conclusion. The jury, after deliberating for hours, returned with a verdict that shocked the nation. Travis Rudolph was acquitted of all charges. The courtroom was immediately filled with mixed reactions. Some in the audience, including Travis' family and supporters, breathed a collective sigh of relief, their faces filled with emotion. On the other side, the victim's family, who had hoped for a conviction, left the courthouse with visible disappointment and anger. The legal battle was over, but for many the questions surrounding the shooting remained unresolved. The verdict sparked a firestorm of debate, with people on both sides of the case voicing their opinions. Those who supported Travis argued that justice had been served. They believed that he had acted in self-defense, that the situation had been out of his control, and that he had made a split-second decision to protect himself from a violent group. They pointed to the lack of solid evidence that could definitively prove that Travis had acted with malice, and they emphasized that he had no history of violence or criminal behavior before the incident. For these supporters, the acquittal was a victory for those who found themselves in unpredictable and dangerous situations. On the other hand, critics of the verdict questioned whether Travis had truly acted in self-defense or if his response had been excessive. They argued that, despite the tense circumstances, the situation could have been de-escalated, and Travis had chosen violence as his solution. The prosecution's portrayal of him as someone who might have been more familiar with aggression than he had let on resonated with those who believed that he had crossed a line. They pointed to the inconsistencies in his statements and the fact that he had brought a weapon into an already volatile situation. To them, the acquittal seemed to represent an erosion of accountability, a dangerous precedent for athletes and celebrities who might feel empowered to use violence without consequences. In the aftermath of the trial, Travis's life was irrevocably changed. While he regained his freedom, the public's perception of him had shifted dramatically. His football career, which had once seemed so promising, was now in jeopardy. Sponsors and teams distanced themselves from him, unwilling to associate with someone involved in such a high-profile and controversial case. The media, which had once celebrated his successes on the field, now scrutinized every aspect of his life, from his past relationships to his connections with individuals tied to criminal activities. Even though Travis was legally exonerated, his reputation was tarnished, and many questioned whether he would ever return to the sport that had once been his life's passion. For Dominic's family, the acquittal was a bitter pill to swallow. They believed that the evidence pointed to Travis being responsible for their loved one's injury, and they struggled to understand how the jury could have found him not guilty. They held on to the belief that the system had failed to deliver justice for Dominic, and the unanswered questions about the shooting left them with a sense of unfinished business. Though the legal proceedings had concluded, their grief and frustration lingered. As the years passed, the case of Travis Rudolph became a haunting reminder of the blurred lines between self-defense and violence. The truth of what happened that night remained elusive, with both sides of the story seemingly incomplete. Travis's acquittal had provided legal closure, but for many, it had not provided the sense of justice they were looking for. The case lingered in the public consciousness, a troubling mystery that few could easily put to rest. Whether Travis had truly been the victim of circumstance or whether he had taken matters into his own hands remained a question that would continue to haunt those who followed the case, leaving a legacy of doubt and division.